June 19th, 1944, 10:03 a.m., USS Lexington, Philippines Sea. The deck of the aircraft carrier smelled like gasoline and panic. Lieutenant Garrett Thorne sat strapped into the cockpit of a dying machine. His Grumman F-6F Hellcat, tail number 7, shook like a paint mixer with a bad bearing. The 18-cylinder Pratt & Whitney radial engine up front wasn't purring. It was coughing, misfiring, spitting hot oil across the windscreen in greasy amber streaks that smeared his view of the sky. Below him, the deck officer was waving the launch signal with both arms, frantic, pointing at the eastern horizon like he was trying to warn someone about an oncoming train. Garrett didn't need the warning. He could hear it in his headset. The radio was screaming, with voices, with static. A solid wall of electromagnetic noise that meant only one thing. The sky was full, not full of clouds, not full of friendly aircraft, full of the enemy. The radar operators buried deep in the steel belly of the Lexington weren't seeing a squadron of Japanese planes. They were seeing a migration, a swarm. Intelligence estimated 450 enemy aircraft inbound, bombers, torpedo planes, and 0 fighters. Every flyable machine the Japanese Imperial Navy had left was clawing for altitude, heading straight for the American fleet, and Garrett Thorne was about to launch into it in a plane that sounded like it was chewing rocks. He checked his fuel gauge, full. He checked his gun switches, armed. He checked the ammunition counters embedded in the instrument panel. 2,400 rounds loaded, 6 Browning M250 caliber machine guns, 3 in each wing, enough firepower to saw a building in half. But it wasn't the quantity that mattered. It was the recipe. Garrett ran his tongue across his teeth. His mouth tasted like metal and adrenaline. He thought about the argument he'd had 36 hours ago. The argument that had started in the armory and ended with half the squadron calling him a lunatic. The catapult officer dropped his hand. The steam catapult fired. Garrett slammed back into his seat. The acceleration crushed the air out of his lungs. The Hellcat screamed down the short deck, the arresting hook skipping across steel, the wheels lifting just before the edge of the flight deck, disappeared beneath him. For one terrible second, the heavy fighter dipped toward the water. The Pacific Ocean rose up to meet him, blue and indifferent. Then the propeller bit into the humid air. The engine roared. The Hellcat clawed upward, shaking, rattling, climbing. Garrett exhaled. He was airborne. He was alone, and he was about to prove everyone wrong. 36 hours earlier, June 17th, 1944, 10 p.m. The armory was deep in the guts of the Lexington, a cramped steel room lit by caged bulbs that buzzed like angry insects. It smelled like gun oil, solvent, and sweat. Wooden crates of ammunition were stacked along the bulkheads. Rows of 50 caliber cartridges gleamed under the harsh light. Brass casings, silver tips, black tips, red tips. Each color meant something. Each tip carried a different kind of death. Chief Petty Officer Roy Miller stood with his arms crossed, watching Garrett Thorne sort through ammunition belts like a man searching for a specific card in a deck. Miller was 42, old for the Navy, old enough to have loaded guns on biplanes when Garrett was still in short pants. His hands were scarred from years of working with steel and fire. His face was weathered. He had the look of a man who had seen young officers come and go, most of them full of ideas, few of them full of sense. He sighed. "You're here again." Garrett didn't look up. He was holding a single 50 caliber cartridge up to the light. Silver tip, M8 armor-piercing incendiary. M8. He turned it slowly, examining the crimp, the weight, the balance. "I need a hot belt, Chief." Miller rubbed his temples. They'd had this conversation 4 times this week. It always ended the same way, with Miller explaining the regulations and Garrett ignoring them. Standard Navy load is 2 armor-piercing, 1 incendiary, 1 tracer. It's a balanced mix. Tested, proven, it works. Garrett set the cartridge down. It's not balanced, it's compromised. Compromised? The tracer round weighs less than the AP, different ballistic coefficient. At 400 yards, the tracer drops 6 inches lower than the rest of the belt. That means every 4th round in my stream is lying to me about where I'm actually shooting. Miller leaned against a crate. You need the tracer to see where you're shooting. I need to see the target, not advertise my position. Garrett picked up another cartridge. He held it next to the first. When I fire a tracer, I'm sending a glowing invitation to every rear gunner in the sky. It says, "Here I am. Please shoot back. I don't need that. I need invisibility. And I need fire." He tapped the silver-tipped M8. This round burns at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It doesn't just punch a hole, it ignites. The Japanese Zero has no armor plating around the fuel tanks, no self-sealing rubber. One of these hits the wing root, the whole plane goes up like a bonfire. Miller straightened. The M8 is unstable. You load a belt with nothing but incendiaries, and if your gun jams, if the barrel heats up, those chemicals can cook off inside your wing. You won't just lose the gun. You'll lose the whole damn wing, and your arm with it. Garrett looked him in the eye. I'll use staggered fire. Never hold the trigger longer than 1 second. Let the barrel cool between bursts. The math works. The math? I've run the numbers. Miller stared at him for a long moment. Garrett Thorne was 24 years old, lean, dark hair cropped short under his officer's cap. His uniform was regulation, but his hands were stained with grease. He didn't look like the other pilots. The other lieutenants spent their downtime playing cards, writing letters, polishing their shoes. Thorne spent his time in the machine shops, in the armory, in the maintenance bays, asking questions, taking notes. The enlisted men didn't know what to make of him. Officers weren't supposed to care about the details. Officers were supposed to fly. Mechanics were supposed to fix. Thorne broke that rule every single day. Miller reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a pack of cigarettes. He lit one. He didn't offer Garrett one. He just smoked and thought. You know what the other pilots call you? The professor. Miller shook his head. The janitor. Garrett blinked. They think you're obsessed with the dirty work, the details, the stuff officers aren't supposed to care about. Garrett said nothing. Miller exhaled smoke. Why do you care so much about this? Garrett was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small notebook. Leather-bound. Worn at the edges. He opened it. The pages were filled with diagrams, ballistics tables, handwritten calculations, notes in the margins, sketches of bullet trajectories, wind drift formulas. I started this when I was 16. Miller leaned forward. My father was an aircraft mechanic, civilian, worked on mail planes. He died in a hangar fire because someone didn't torque a fuel line fitting properly. Maintenance oversight. A $2 mistake that killed him. Garrett closed the notebook. I learned something that day, Chief. The details matter. The small things. The things people ignore because they're boring or complicated or not glamorous. Those are the things that keep you alive or kill you. He looked at Miller. I don't want to die because I trusted the standard answer. I want to die if I die, knowing I did everything I could to get the details right. Miller stared at the notebook, then at Garrett. Then he sighed. All right. All right. I'll load your damn hot belt 100% M8, no tracers, no armor piercing, just fire, but if you jam your guns and get yourself killed, don't haunt me. Garrett almost smiled. I won't. Miller stubbed out his cigarette. "And if you survive, you owe me a bottle of bourbon." "Deal." They shook hands. Miller turned to his crew, two young sailors who had been pretending not to listen. "You heard the lieutenant, load tail number 7, full M8 belts, all 6 guns, 2,400 rounds. And do it right. If one of those belts jams, I'll make you load every gun on this ship by hand." The sailors got to work. Garrett watched them for a moment, then he walked out of the armory and headed topside. Behind him, Miller looked at the notebook Garrett had left on the workbench. He opened it. On the first page, in careful handwriting, was a quote. "Precision is the difference between almost dead and almost alive. Choose precision." Miller closed the notebook and put it back. He got to work loading the bullets. June 18th, 1944, 6 p.m., Ready Room, USS Lexington. The ready room smelled like sweat, cigarette smoke, and stale coffee. It was a cramped compartment lined with benches and fold-down desks. The walls were covered with charts, flight schedules, and pin-up girls torn from magazines. 30 pilots sat in various states of exhaustion, listening to Commander Carl Brennan brief the next day's mission. Brennan was 40, square-jawed, graying at the temples. He had the look of a man who had flown combat missions before most of his pilots had learned to shave. He stood at the front of the room, pointer in hand, tapping a map of the Philippine Sea. "Intelligence says the Japanese are massing their carrier groups here. We expect a major strike tomorrow morning. Could be 200 planes, could be 500. Either way, we're going to meet them in the air and send them to the bottom of the ocean." He tapped the map again. "Standard loadout. 2 AP, 1 incendiary, 1 tracer. You get separated, you climb to 20,000 feet and regroup. You see a 0, you don't dogfight, you dive, you extend, you use your speed. The Hellcat is faster in a straight line. Use it." He paused. "Questions?" Garrett raised his hand. Brennan looked at him. "Thorne, permission to use a modified ammunition load, sir." The room went quiet. Pilots turned to look at him. Brennan set down the pointer. "Modified how?" 100% M8 armor-piercing incendiary. No tracers." Someone in the back of the room laughed. Brennan didn't. "You want to fly without tracers?" "Yes, sir." "How are you going to aim?" "I'll close the range, point-blank shooting. I don't need tracers to aim if I can see the rivets on the target." Another pilot spoke up. Lieutenant Pete Donovan, 26. Red hair, freckles, good pilot, good friend, but skeptical. "Garrett, you can't see where you're shooting without tracers. You'll be firing blind." "I'll be firing invisible. Big difference." Donovan shook his head. "You're overthinking it, Professor. Just point the nose and pull the trigger. The bullets will go where you're aiming." "Not if I'm aiming with a round that has a different weight than the rest of the belt." The room started murmuring. Pilots were smirking, whispering. One of them called out, "Thorne's trying to reinvent the wheel again." Another voice, "Suicide mix." Garrett ignored them. Brennan crossed his arms. "Lieutenant, the Navy has been using mixed belts for 3 years. They work. They're proven. You're asking me to let you fly into the largest air battle of the war with an untested ammunition load that could jam your guns and leave you defenseless. With respect, sir, it's not untested. I've calculated the ballistics, I've tested the feed mechanism. Chief Miller is loading the belts tonight. It'll work." Brennan stared at him. "You're that confident?" "Yes, sir." "Confident enough to bet your life on it?" "Yes, sir." Brennan picked up the pointer again. "Fine. You want to be a martyr, Thorne, go ahead. But don't take my boys with you. You fly your suicide mix. Everyone else flies standard. Dismissed." The pilots stood and filed out. Donovan walked up to Garrett. "You're crazy?" "Maybe." "If you jam your guns, you're a sitting duck." "I won't jam." Donovan shook his head. "Good luck, Garrett. You're going to need it." He walked out. Garrett stood alone in the ready room. He looked at the map on the wall. The vast blue expanse of the Pacific, the red marks indicating enemy positions. He thought about the notebook in his locker. He thought about his father. And he thought about the silver-tipped bullets Chief Miller was loading into the wings of Hellcat number 7. Tomorrow he would find out if he was right, or if he was just another name on a casualty list. June 19th, 1944, 9:30 a.m. flight deck, USS Lexington. The sun was already brutal. Garrett stood next to Hellcat number 7, watching the plane captains run their pre-flight checks. The deck was organized chaos. Planes were being fueled, armed, spotted. Deck crews sprinted between aircraft, pulling chocks, checking arresting hooks, signaling with colored flags. The noise was overwhelming. Engines roaring, propellers spinning, the ocean wind whipping across the deck. Garrett walked around his plane, running his hand along the fuselage. The paint was chipped. The skin was dented. This wasn't a showroom bird, this was a workhorse. Tail number 7 had a reputation. The plane captains called it the Roughneck. The engine had been flagged for maintenance twice this month. Misfiring, running rough, but there was no time to fix it. Every flyable aircraft was needed. Garrett climbed the wing and dropped into the cockpit. He ran through his checklist. Fuel, full. Oil pressure, good. Magnetos, flickering. He tapped the gauge. The needle steadied, then flickered again. A plane captain climbed up next to him. "Sir, this bird's got a bad attitude. Engine's been coughing all morning. We can get you another plane." Garrett shook his head. "The ammo's already loaded in this one. I'm not wasting Chief Miller's time reloading another bird. I'll fly this one." The sailor looked doubtful. "Your funeral, Lieutenant?" He climbed down. Garrett sat alone in the cockpit. He could feel the weight of the ammunition in the wings, 2,400 rounds, almost all of them silver-tipped M8 incendiaries, no tracers, no margin for error. He reached up and wiped a smear of oil off the inside of the windscreen. The engine hadn't even started yet, and it was already leaking. The deck officer blew his whistle. "Time to start engines." Garrett primed the fuel. He cracked the throttle. He hit the starter. The Pratt & Whitney coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. The whole airframe shook. The vibration rattled his teeth. The engine sounded angry, pistons hammering, the supercharger whining. Oil pressure climbed into the yellow. Temperature gauge started rising. Garrett didn't shut it down. He looked to his left. Donovan was in the plane next to him, giving him a thumbs up. Garrett returned it. Then the radio crackled. all fighters, bandits inbound, Vector 270, Angels 20, many bandits. This is not a drill. Launch immediately." The deck officer started waving. Garrett pushed the throttle forward. The Hellcat lurched. The wheels rolled. The deck crew pulled the chocks. He taxied to the catapult. The hook was attached. The catapult officer raised his hand, circled it, then dropped it. The steam catapult kicked Garrett in the spine. The Hellcat shot forward. 50 feet, 60, 70. The end of the deck. The edge, the drop. The plane dipped. The ocean filled the windscreen. Then the propeller caught air. The Hellcat climbed. Garrett pulled the stick back, hard. The nose came up. The horizon leveled. The blue sky opened above him. He checked his instruments. Engine temperature, high. Oil pressure, fluctuating. Airspeed, 120 knots and climbing. He looked back at the carrier, already small, already distant. He looked forward. The sky was empty. But somewhere out there, beyond the clouds, beyond the horizon, 450 Japanese aircraft were headed straight for the fleet, and Garrett Thorne was climbing to meet them in a plane that wanted to shake itself apart with ammunition that everyone said would get him killed. He reached down and touched the gun trigger. He whispered to himself, "Let's see who's right." The clouds swallowed him. He pushed through the gray. Seconds later, he broke into brilliant sunlight at 15,000 feet, and the enemy appeared on the horizon, like a biblical plague. 15,000 feet. June 19th, 1944. 10:18 a.m. Garrett squinted through the oil-streaked windscreen. The smear had gotten worse during the climb, but he could still see what mattered. And what he saw made his breath catch. It wasn't a formation of enemy aircraft, it was a plague of locusts. The sky to the east was filled with black dots, not 10, not 20. Garrett counted fast, his eyes scanning left to right, up and down. 50 aircraft, maybe more. They were stacked in layers like a wedding cake made of aluminum and death. At the bottom, skimming low, were the torpedo bombers, fat, slow, vulnerable. In the middle tier were the Judy dive bombers droning along in a loose gaggle. And at the top, weaving back and forth like angry hornets, were the Zeros, the legendary Mitsubishi A6M fighters, fast, agile, deadly. Garrett was one man in one broken plane. The math was insane. He checked his fuel. 3/4, enough. He checked his guns, armed. He checked his ammunition counters, 2,400 rounds. All of them invisible. All of them fire. He could turn around, rejoin the squadron, wait for backup, or he could climb. He chose to climb. Garrett pulled the stick back and shoved the throttle to the gate. The Hellcat's nose pitched up. The airspeed bled off. 180 knots. 160. The engine protested, but the altimeter wound up. 16,000, 18, 20. He kept climbing. The Japanese formation was below him now. They were flying straight and level, confident in their numbers. They hadn't seen him. Why would they? Who would be stupid enough to attack 50 planes alone? Garrett leveled off at 24,000 feet. He looked down. The enemy formation looked like a school of fish, tight in the center, loose at the edges. The bomber pilots were young. He could tell by the way they wobbled in the turbulence. Rookies, poorly trained. Japan was running out of veterans. The men who had attacked Pearl Harbor were dead, killed at Midway, at Guadalcanal, at Rabaul. These were the replacements, boys with barely enough flight hours to land their planes, let alone fight. Garrett positioned himself directly behind the sun. In aerial combat, the sun is the only camouflage that matters. Put the sun at your back, and you become a shadow, a ghost. The enemy gunners look up and see nothing but blinding white light. He rolled inverted, pulled the stick into his lap. The Hellcat fell out of the sky like a piano pushed off a roof. The airspeed indicator wound up fast. 200 knots. 250. 300. The wind screamed over the canopy. The controls stiffened. Rolls. The rough idles smoothed out as speed conquered vibration. Garrett picked his target, a Judy dive bomber drifting slightly left of the formation. The pilot was having trouble keeping position. The plane yawed back and forth, hunting for stable air. Garrett dove steeper, 400 knots. The Judy grew larger in his windscreen. He could see the greenhouse canopy, the rear gunner's position, the meatball insignia painted on the fuselage, the rising sun, red circle on white. He waited. Most pilots panic at range. They open fire at 1,000 yards and spray lead into empty sky, hoping to get lucky. Garrett didn't believe in luck. He believed in physics. He closed the distance. 1,000 yards, 800, 600. Now he could see details, the panel lines on the Judy's wing, the exhaust stains streaking back from the engine, the pilot's leather helmet visible through the canopy glass. Garrett's hand hovered over the trigger. A circular button on the control stick, worn smooth by 1,000 flights, 500 yards. He put the Judy in the center of his gun sight. A simple ring and bead reticle, iron sights, no radar, no computing gun sight, just geometry and instinct. 400 yards. He could see the rivets now. He squeezed the trigger. The Hellcat shuddered. All 6 guns fired simultaneously, 50 caliber Browning machine guns, 3 in each wing. The sound was like tearing canvas, a hard, flat, industrial roar. But there was no glowing stream of tracers arcing through the sky, just invisible death. Garrett held the trigger for 1 second. 60 rounds, 10 from each gun. Then he released. The result was immediate. The M8 incendiary rounds punched through the Judy's left wing root, right where the fuel tanks lived. The aluminum skin tore open. The bullets didn't just penetrate, they ignited. Magnesium and phosphorus, compounds burning at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. There was no gradual fire, there was no smoke trail, there was an explosion. The Judy's wing erupted in a brilliant orange fireball. The flames didn't spread, they consumed. The entire left wing folded upward, peeled away from the fuselage and separated. The bomber snap-rolled to the left, the nose pitched down. The plane tumbled end over end, shedding pieces, trailing fire, falling toward the ocean 5 miles below. Garrett didn't watch it hit the water. He was already using the momentum of his dive to climb, pulling back on the stick, trading speed for altitude. The G-forces crushed him into his seat. His vision grayed at the edges, the blood drained from his head. He grunted, tensing his legs, forcing the blood back up. The Hellcat zoomed skyward, back toward the sun, back toward invisibility. Garrett leveled off and looked back. The Japanese formation was rippling. Pilots were craning their necks, looking around, confused. One of their bombers had just exploded, but they couldn't see the attacker. They were scanning the sky, looking for a squadron, a wolf pack. They didn't realize it was one man. Garrett checked his ammunition counter, 2,340 rounds remaining. He had just destroyed an enemy aircraft with 60 bullets. The Navy's gunnery manual said it took an average of 1,000 rounds to down a bomber. Garrett had used 6% of that. He allowed himself one thought. The math was right. Then he rolled over and dove again. 10:22 a.m., 18,000 feet. Kill number 2 was harder. Garrett picked a target in the center of the formation. Another Judy, this one flying tight, boxed in by other bombers. If he missed, if he overshot, he would fly directly into the sights of a dozen rear gunners. He didn't plan to miss. He dove from the sun again. Same approach, same physics, but this time the rear gunner saw him. A stream of small-caliber bullets zipped past Garrett's canopy. Japanese 7.7mm rounds, tiny compared to 50 caliber. They looked like glowing fireflies in the bright sunlight. Tracer rounds. The irony wasn't lost on Garrett. The enemy gunner was using tracers, showing Garrett exactly where he was shooting, making it easy to avoid the stream of fire. Garrett adjusted his dive angle, slipped to the right. The tracers passed harmlessly to his left. He closed the range. 600 yards, 500. The rear gunner kept firing, desperate, panicking. 400 yards. Garrett put the gun sight on the Judy's engine, cowling. He waited until the target filled the reticle, then he tapped the trigger. 1 second, 60 rounds. The M8 bullets walked across the Judy's nose like a chainsaw cutting through wood. They hit the radial engine, the oil cooler, the magnesium engine block. The incendiary compounds ignited everything they touched. The front of the bomber vanished in a sheet of white-hot flame. The propeller, suddenly disconnected from the engine, flew off. It spun away into the blue sky like a giant shuriken, tumbling, flashing in the sun. The Judy pitched up violently, stalled, rolled inverted, and fell. Garrett pulled up hard. The G-forces slammed him into his seat. His vision tunneled. He tasted copper. His flight suit squeezed his legs, forcing blood to his brain. He climbed back toward the sun. 2 down, 3 minutes elapsed. Now the formation was starting to panic. Pilots were breaking discipline, weaving, looking over their shoulders. They still couldn't see the ghost that was killing them, but the Zeros had noticed. Garrett looked up. A dozen of them were rolling over, diving toward him, trying to intercept the invisible attacker. The dogfight was about to begin. 10:24 a.m., 15,000 feet. Garrett saw the Zeros coming. Distinctive square wingtips, sleek fuselages. They were fast, nimble. In a turning fight, they could outmaneuver the Hellcat all day long. But Garrett wasn't going to run. He spotted one Zero that had gotten overconfident. The pilot was aggressive, pulling hard to get position. He yanked his nose up, trying to climb and hang on his propeller to get a deflection shot at Garrett. It was a classic Zero tactic. Use the light airframe to outclimb the heavy American fighter. But the pilot made a mistake. He held the climb too long. Garrett didn't dive away. He pulled hard, accepting the turn fight for 3 seconds, just long enough. The Zero pilot, expecting the Hellcat to run, was caught off guard. He overshot his energy state. The lightweight fighter wobbled at the top of the climb, momentarily vulnerable. Garrett snapped the Hellcat inverted, pulled through -G, and reversed. The world spun. His seat straps bit into his shoulders. Loose items floated in the cockpit. Then he was upright again, and the Zero was directly in front of him. Point blank. The Japanese pilot saw him. Too late. His eyes went wide through the canopy glass. Garrett squeezed the trigger. Half-second burst. The silver-tipped rounds hit the Zero at the wing root, right where the fuel tanks connected to the fuselage. The Japanese fighter had no armor plating, no self-sealing fuel tanks. It was built for speed and agility, not survivability. The Zero didn't catch fire. It exploded. The fuel vapor inside the empty space of the tanks ignited with the force of a bomb. The entire center section of the aircraft blew outward. Pieces of burning aluminum fluttered down like confetti. The wings separated, the tail broke off, the engine tumbled free. It didn't look like an airplane anymore. It looked like a firework. Garrett pulled up. His engine was warming up, but still running strong enough. The oil pressure held steady. 3 kills, 4 minutes, and Garrett was just getting started. 10:26 a.m., 8,000 feet. The sky was chaos now. Zeros were diving from above. Tracers zipped past Garrett's canopy from 3 directions. The Japanese pilots were furious. They had abandoned the bombers and were swarming toward the lone American fighter like wolves cornering prey. Garrett was low on altitude, low on energy. He needed a tactical advantage. He found it. He dove hard, pushed the stick forward. The Hellcat didn't just descend, it fell. The nose pointed straight down. The airspeed wound up past 400 knots. The airframe groaned. The wings flexed, rivets creaked. The Zeros tried to follow. But their lightweight airframes couldn't handle the speed. At 400 knots, the control surfaces started to flutter. The wings began to shake. The pilots had to pull out early or risk tearing their planes apart. Garrett kept diving. He pulled out low, just 1,000 feet above the ocean. The G-forces crushed him. His vision went gray, then black, then gray again. He leveled off, and now he was directly underneath the bomber formation. It was a brilliant move. By positioning himself below the enemy bombers, he had used their own aircraft as a shield. The Zeros above couldn't shoot at him without risking hitting their own bombers. Garrett had turned their numbers into a liability. He looked up. A Judy was right above him, fat belly exposed, flying straight and level. He pulled the nose up, aimed. This was a blind spot shot. No rear gunner could see him from this angle. He waited until the bomber filled his windscreen, then he fired. 1.5 seconds, 90 rounds. The M8 bullet slammed into the Judy's belly fuel tank. The vapor inside ignited. The explosion was massive. The entire center section of the bomber blew outward. Pieces of flaming aluminum rained down. Garrett yanked the stick left, hard. The Hellcat skidded sideways. Debris pelted his wings, sounded like gravel hitting a tin roof. He flew through the debris cloud, emerged on the other side. 4 kills, but the next one almost killed him. 10:27 a.m. 2,000 feet. Garrett spotted another Judy trailing the pack. The pilot was pushing his engine hard. Black smoke pouring from the exhaust, trying to catch up to the formation. Garrett lined up the shot. But this pilot was different, experienced. He saw Garrett coming. He banked hard left, trying to spoil the aim. It was a good move, but Garrett wasn't aiming at where the plane was. He was aiming at where it was going to be. He led the target, kicked the rudder, skidded the Hellcat, pointed the nose ahead of the turning bomber. He fired. Longer burst this time, 2 seconds, 120 rounds. The stream of incendiaries caught the Judy in the engine cowling. The magnesium flared white hot. But the explosion didn't happen underneath the plane. It happened right in Garrett's face. The bomber blew up less than 100 yards in front of him. A massive fireball expanded instantly. Flames, smoke, jagged metal. It filled his entire field of view. There was no time to turn, no time to climb. Garrett gritted his teeth and flew straight into the fireball. For one terrible second, his world was orange. He couldn't see, couldn't breathe. The heat seared through the canopy. This is how I die, he thought. Not shot down, burned. Then the Hellcat punched through. Blue sky. He gasped, alive. He checked his wings, dented, scorched. Paint burned black, but still attached. 5 kills. But now the sky was full of zeros. They were converging from all directions. High, low, left, right. Garrett looked at his fuel gauge. 1/4. He looked at his ammunition counter. 1,800 rounds left. Enough for one more. 10:28 a.m. 1,500 feet. One more Judy was struggling to keep up with the formation, trailing behind. Engine smoking. Garrett made his decision. He pushed the throttle through the emergency gate. War power. The engine temperature climbed into the red zone, but it responded with a surge of power. Garrett closed the distance. Fast. 100 yards. 75. 50. He was so close he could see the rear gunner frantically trying to unjam his machine gun. The man looked young, terrified. Garrett didn't hesitate. This was war. It was math. It was him or the fleet. He squeezed the trigger. Half-second burst. The guns roared, then stopped. He hadn't run out of ammunition. He had simply stopped firing. Because the target ceased to exist. The M8 rounds sawed the tail completely off the Judy. The plane snapped in half in mid-air. The front half tumbled forward. The rear half spun away. The pilot was ejected into the slipstream, arms flailing. Garrett pulled up. He checked his watch. 8 minutes had elapsed since his first shot. He checked his ammunition counters, approximately 360 rounds fired, 6 enemy aircraft destroyed. 60 rounds per kill. The experts had been wrong. The mockers had been wrong. Garrett Thorne had just proven that precision beats volume, that fire beats lead, that invisible beats visible. But the fight wasn't over, because now the sky around him erupted in black puffs of smoke. Anti-aircraft fire, American anti-aircraft fire. He had chased the enemy so far that he had flown into the defensive umbrella of his own fleet, and they were shooting at him. A 5-inch shell exploded 30 feet from his right wing. The concussion wave slammed the Hellcat sideways. Shrapnel pinged off the fuselage. The canopy cracked. Garrett banked hard, showed his belly to the ships below, trying to display his silhouette, trying to show he was American. "Don't shoot," he yelled into his oxygen mask, even though no one could hear him. "I'm on your side." Another shell burst. Closer this time. Garrett shoved the nose down, dove toward the water, got low. Wave top level, 200 feet, 150, under the radar, under the guns. He turned toward the Lexington. The carrier looked impossibly small on the horizon. His fuel gauge was bouncing on empty, but he was alive, and he was going home. He keyed his radio. "Lexington, this is Thorne. Inbound. Request immediate landing." The controller's voice crackled back, stunned. "Thorne? We saw—" "How many did you—" Garrett looked at the smoke trails streaking the sky behind him. 6 black columns rising from the ocean where burning aircraft had hit the water. "6 confirmed. Tell Chief Miller his silver bullets work. Get more ready." There was silence on the radio, then, "Roger that. Deck is clear. You're number 1 for landing." Garrett dropped his landing gear. One wheel came down, the other stuck. He slapped the hydraulic panel. The second wheel clunked into place. Flaps down, hook down. He lined up with the carrier deck. It looked like a postage stamp floating in an ocean. He cut the throttle. The Hellcat descended. The deck rushed up. His hook caught the number 3 wire. The arresting cable yanked the fighter to a halt. Garrett slammed forward into his harness. The straps bit into his shoulders. The engine coughed once and died. Garrett sat in the sudden silence. His hands were shaking. His flight suit was soaked with sweat. He could smell cordite, smoke, fear. He was alive. He had just downed 6 enemy aircraft in 8 minutes with ammunition everyone said would kill him. And he still had half his bullets left. He popped the canopy. Fresh sea air rushed in. It tasted like victory. USS Lexington Flight Deck, June 19th, 1944. 10:35 a.m. The deck crew was already running toward Hellcat number 7 before Garrett could unbuckle his harness. They weren't cheering, not yet. They were staring. The plane looked like it had been through a shredder. The windscreen was black with soot and oil. The wings were scorched. Paint burned off in long streaks. Dents pockmarked the aluminum skin where debris had hammered it. Shrapnel holes punctured the tail. One of the plane captains whistled low. "Jesus Christ, Lieutenant, how are you alive?" Garrett didn't answer. His legs were shaking. He gripped the canopy rail and pulled himself upright. His flight suit was soaked through. His hands trembled as he peeled off his gloves. He could still feel the vibration in his bones, the hammer of the guns, the roar of the engine, the heat of the fireball he'd flown through. He climbed onto the wing. Chief Roy Miller was already there, popping the access panels, checking the guns. Miller was expecting disaster. Melted barrels, warped feed mechanisms, cooked off rounds fused in the chambers. That's what happened when you loaded a hot belt and fired it in combat. That's what the manual said. That's what 30 years of experience told him. He pulled the first ammunition belt out of the port wing gun. It was heavy. He stared at it. Then he pulled the belts from the other 5 guns. All of them were heavy, full, barely touched. Miller looked up at Garrett, who was now standing on the wing, lighting a cigarette with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "How many rounds did you fire?" Garrett took a drag. The tobacco steadied him slightly. "About 360. 360 rounds, give or take." Miller looked at the ammunition counters on the instrument panel, then back at the belts. "You had 2,400 rounds loaded. You brought back over 2,000. Math checks out, Chief. And you shot down—" Garrett held up his hand, 6 fingers extended. Miller stared at him. "6. You shot down 6 aircraft with 360 rounds. 60 rounds per kill, like I calculated." A crowd was forming now. Pilots, deck crew, officers. Word was spreading across the ship like wildfire. Someone had just come back from the biggest air battle of the war with impossible numbers. Miller set down the ammunition belt. He wiped grease from his hands on a rag. Then he looked at Garrett. "You were right. I was right. And I was wrong." Garrett took another drag. "You loaded the belts, Chief. You did the real work. I just pulled the trigger." Miller allowed himself a rare smile. "I'll get more silver bullets ready." "Appreciated," a voice shouted from the crowd. "Hey, Thorne, Garrett turned. A Navy photographer was pushing through the deck crew. Young kid, maybe 20, camera hanging around his neck. He'd been assigned to document flight operations, get shots of the planes, the pilots, the action. He raised his camera. "Give me something for the folks back home." Garrett looked at him, oil-smeared face, exhausted eyes, hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. He was too tired to pose, too drained to salute. But he grinned, a wide, feral, adrenaline-soaked grin that said, "I just bet my life on math and won." He raised his right hand, 6 fingers. The camera clicked. That single image, a young pilot standing on the wing of a battered fighter, holding up 6 fingers, grinning like a man who'd just walked through hell and come out the other side, would appear in newspapers from San Francisco to New York. It would be painted on morale posters. It would be used in war bond drives. It would become the defining photograph of American air power in the Pacific. But Garrett didn't know that yet. He just knew he was alive, and that the invisible ammo had worked. 10:50 a.m. flight deck. Commander Carl Brennan pushed through the crowd. He was sweating. His flight suit was clean. He hadn't launched yet. He'd been in the carrier's combat information center, watching the radar, listening to the radio chatter, trying to make sense of the chaos. The radar operators had reported something impossible. 6 enemy contacts had disappeared from the screen in rapid succession. 8 minutes. 6 kills. They thought it was a malfunction, a glitch. Then Garrett's voice had come over the radio. 6 confirmed. Brennan walked up to the wing of Hellcat No. 7, looked at the damage, looked at Chief Miller, holding the nearly full ammunition belts, looked at Garrett, who was stubbing out his cigarette on the wing. Brennan came to attention, saluted. "Lieutenant Thorne," Garrett returned the salute, sloppy, tired. "Sir?" "I owe you an apology." Garrett blinked. "Sir?" "I called your ammunition load a suicide mix. I was wrong. You just proved that precision beats volume, that innovation beats doctrine." Brennan lowered his salute. Request permission to refit the entire squadron with Thorn loads, hot belts, no tracers, just fire." Garrett straightened slightly. "Permission granted, sir." Brennan turned to Chief Miller. "Chief, how fast can you reload the squadron?" Miller glanced at his watch. 2 hours if we hustle. "Make it 90 minutes. The Japanese aren't done yet." "Aye, sir." Brennan looked back at Garrett. "You just changed the way we fight this war, Lieutenant. I hope you know that." Before Garrett could respond, another Hellcat thumped onto the deck behind them. The hook caught the wire. The plane jerked to a halt. The canopy slid back. Lieutenant Pete Donovan climbed out. His flight suit was clean. His plane was unmarked. He'd scored 2 kills himself. Solid work, good shooting. He saw the crowd around Garrett's plane. He jogged over. "Garrett, you made it back!" He grabbed Garrett in a bear hug, lifted him off his feet. "I saw the smoke trails. I thought you'd bought it for sure." Garrett grunted. "Takes more than 50 zeros to kill me." Donovan set him down, looked at the damage on the plane, the soot, the dents, the scorched paint. "How many?" Garrett held up 6 fingers. Donovan's jaw dropped. 6. You got 6? "Yep. In 8 minutes. "About that." Donovan shook his head, laughed, slapped Garrett on the back. "You crazy son of a bitch. You were right, the invisible ammo, the hot belt, the whole thing. You were right, and we were all wrong." "Wouldn't be the first time," Donovan grinned. "From now on, I'm flying whatever you're flying. Thorn load all the way." Other pilots were landing now, the whole squadron returning from the fight. They climbed out of their cockpits, saw the crowd, saw Garrett standing on the wing with 6 fingers raised, and the mockery evaporated. The professor, the janitor, the man they'd laughed at. He'd just become the ace of the day. 4 p.m. Ready room. The battle was over. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, they were already calling it. The most lopsided aerial victory in the history of naval warfare. 400 Japanese aircraft shot down. American losses, 29 planes, 16 pilots rescued. The Japanese Naval Air Force had been effectively wiped out in a single afternoon. They would never recover. The tide of the Pacific War had turned, and right at the tip of that spear was Garrett Thorne. 6 kills, top score of the day, but he sat alone in the ready room writing in his notebook, updating his ballistics tables, recording the results, temperature, altitude, range, deflection angle. He was treating it like a laboratory experiment, because to him, that's what it was, a test. And the test had worked. Commander Brennan entered the ready room. He was carrying a clipboard and a cup of coffee. "Thorne," Garrett looked up. "Sir, you've been recommended for the Navy Cross." Garrett set down his pencil. "For what, sir?" "For single-handedly engaging a superior enemy force and destroying 6 aircraft with minimal expenditure of ammunition, for tactical innovation under fire, for—" Brennan paused, proving that sometimes the manual is wrong. Garrett closed his notebook. "I was just doing the math, sir." "You did more than math, Lieutenant. You changed doctrine. As of 1600 hours today, all carrier air groups in Task Force 58 are authorized to use Thorne loads. Hot belts, incendiary heavy, no tracers unless specifically requested. Your ammunition mix is now standard across the fleet." Garrett absorbed that, his idea, his obsession, his father's death, Chief Miller's reluctant trust. All of it had led to this moment. The Navy was adopting his method. "What do they call it, sir?" "The Thorne Belt." Brennan smiled. "Your invisible ammo just became visible. In a good way." Garrett allowed himself a small smile. "Chief Miller did the hard work. He loaded the belts. He trusted me. And you trusted yourself. That's the part that matters." Brennan set the coffee down in front of Garrett. "Get some rest, Lieutenant. The war's not over. We'll need you again tomorrow." He walked out. Garrett sat alone. He thought about the 6 pilots he'd killed. 6 men who had woken up that morning expecting to come home, who had families, friends, dreams. He didn't celebrate their deaths, but he didn't mourn them either. This was war. It was math. It was survival. And today he'd survived by being right when everyone else was wrong. August 1945. War's end. Garrett Thorne finished the war with 19 confirmed aerial kills. The Navy's 4th-ranking ace. He flew in every major carrier battle from the Marianas to Okinawa. He trained new pilots. He refined the Thorne curve, the art of holding fire until point-blank range, then delivering a short, precise burst of incendiary rounds. Flight schools across the Navy started teaching it. The invisible ammo became legend. The man who proved the experts wrong became a case study in tactical innovation. Garrett received the Navy Cross, the Distinguished Flying Cross. The Air Medal with 5 gold stars. He shook hands with admirals, appeared in newsreels, was interviewed by reporters who wanted to know the secret to his success. He always gave the same answer. Do the math, trust your calculations, and give credit to the mechanics who load the guns. He never claimed to be a genius, just competent. 1946. California. Garrett mustered out of the Navy with an honorable discharge and a chest full of medals he didn't wear. He moved to Los Angeles, found an apartment, got a job at a bank. The transition was surreal, from dogfighting at 400 knots to approving mortgage applications, from life and death decisions to calculating interest rates. The customers who sat across from his desk saw a quiet man with a receding hairline and a friendly smile. Polite, professional, he helped them buy houses, start businesses, plan for retirement. None of them knew that the hands signing their loan documents had once turned 6 aircraft into falling stars in 8 minutes. Garrett never brought it up. When people asked what he did in the war, he said, "I was a pilot, did my job." And he didn't correct the history books when they got details wrong. He didn't attend squadron reunions. He just wanted to be normal. But the legend didn't need his permission to grow. 2014. Age 94. 1 year before death. Pete Donovan drove up to Garrett's house in Los Angeles on a Saturday morning in October. They were both old now. Pete's red hair had gone white. His hands were spotted with age. Garrett moved slower these days. His hands shook from arthritis. They sat on the porch, drank coffee, watched planes from LAX cross the sky overhead, leaving white contrails that faded in the blue. "You ever think about it?" Pete asked. "The 8 minutes?" Garrett was quiet for a long time. "Every day." "Regrets?" Garrett watched a contrail fade. "I think about the 6th pilot, the one whose tail I sawed off. He couldn't have been older than 20. I saw his face for half a second before the plane came apart. Just a kid," Pete nodded. "You saved the fleet, Garrett. Hundreds of sailors, maybe thousands. I know the math, Pete. 6 enemy pilots versus 1,000 friendly sailors. The equation works." Garrett set down his coffee. "But I still see his face." They sat in silence. Then Pete reached into his jacket and pulled out a faded photograph. The 6-finger photo, the one from 1944, creased at the edges, yellowed with time. "I found this in a Japanese aviation museum last year in Hiroshima. They had a whole exhibit about the turkey shoot, about the American pilot who used ghost bullets. That's what they called your ammo. Ghost bullets. Maboroshi no Dangan." He handed the photo to Garrett. "They said you changed their tactics too. Made them add armor, seal their fuel tanks, redesign their fighters. You didn't just win one battle. You changed how they built their planes, how they thought about combat." Garrett stared at the photo. The young man on the wing, 6 fingers raised, grinning, covered in oil and soot. He didn't recognize himself. "I was just doing the math," he said quietly. "No," Pete said. "You were doing more than math. You were proving that one man who's right can matter more than 1,000 who are wrong. That's not math, brother, that's courage." Garrett handed back the photo. "Keep it. I don't need reminders." Pete smiled. "I'll keep it for you, for when you forget." Garrett looked at his old friend, his wingman, the man who had believed in him when no one else did. "Thank you, Pete." "For what?" "For not calling me crazy back then, when everyone else did." Pete laughed. "Oh, I thought you were crazy. I just figured crazy was better than dead wrong." They sat together until the sun went down. It was the last time they saw each other. Pete died 3 months later. Heart attack. Quick, painless. Garrett followed a year after that, but the 6 fingers lived on. 2015, age 95. March 17th. Garrett Thorne died peacefully in his sleep on a Tuesday morning. His daughters found him in bed. The window was open. A breeze moved the curtains. On his nightstand sat a worn leather notebook, the one he'd started at 16 after his father's death in the hangar fire. The pages were yellowed now, the calculations faded. But on the first page, in careful handwriting, the quote remained. "Precision is the difference between almost dead and almost alive. Choose precision." His obituary in the Los Angeles Times was 3 paragraphs long. Garrett Thorne, 95, Navy fighter ace and tactical innovator, died March 17th. Thorne is credited with revolutionizing aerial gunnery techniques during World War II. He scored 19 confirmed victories, including 6 aircraft downed in 8 minutes during the Battle of the Philippine Sea. After the war, he worked as a banker for 40 years. He is survived by 2 daughters and 4 grandchildren. 3 paragraphs. A quiet end for a man who had lived loudly for 8 minutes in 1944. But his legacy lived on. United States Naval Academy, Annapolis. Present day. The instructor stands at the front of the classroom. 40 midshipmen sit at attention. Future naval aviators, the best and brightest. The instructor clicks a remote. A black and white photograph appears on the screen. A young pilot standing on the wing of a battered fighter. Oil-smeared face, exhausted grin, right hand raised, 6 fingers extended. This is Lieutenant Garrett Thorne, June 19, 1944, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The midshipmen lean forward. Thorne was mocked by his squadron for using what they called invisible ammo. He removed all tracer rounds from his ammunition belts and loaded pure incendiary rounds. Everyone said it was suicide, that he'd jam his guns, that he'd get killed. The instructor pauses. He didn't. In 8 minutes, he downed 6 enemy aircraft using 360 rounds of ammunition, 60 rounds per kill. The Navy average at the time was over 1,000 rounds per kill. He proved that precision beats volume. That discipline beats spray and pray. A midshipman raises her hand. Sir, how did he aim without tracers? The instructor smiles. He closed the range. He didn't shoot until he could see the rivets on the enemy plane. He trusted his calculations. He believed in his math, and he proved that sometimes the manual is wrong. He clicks to the next slide. A diagram, the Thorne curve, the tactical approach, the firing solution. This technique is still taught today. Precision fire, disciplined trigger control, close-range engagement, invisible approach. Thorne didn't just win a battle, he changed how we fight. The instructor turns off the projector. Remember this, innovation doesn't come from following the rules. It comes from understanding the rules well enough to know when to break them. Thorne was called crazy, he was called reckless, he was told he'd die, but he did the math, he trusted himself, and he saved lives by being right when everyone else was wrong. The classroom is silent. Then one midshipman asks, Sir, what happened to him after the war? The instructor looks at the blank screen where the photo had been. He became a banker, lived quietly in Los Angeles, rarely spoke about his service. When people asked, he'd say, I was just doing my job. He died in 2015 at age 95, but every time a naval aviator holds their fire until point-blank range, every time someone chooses precision over volume, Garrett Thorne is there, still teaching, still proving the doubters wrong. He closes his notes. Class dismissed. The midshipmen file out. But they remember the photo, the 6 fingers, the invisible fingers, and the man who proved that sometimes being different isn't being wrong. Sometimes it's being right when everyone else hasn't caught up yet. Epilogue. Naval Aviation Museum, Pensacola, Florida. The photograph hangs in a place of honor. Black and white. Faded at the edges, protected behind glass. A young man on a wing, 6 fingers raised, grinning through the oil and soot. Beneath it, a placard reads, Lieutenant Garrett Thorne, USN, 1920 to 2015. The Battle of the Philippine Sea, June 19, 1944. 6 kills in 8 minutes using 360 rounds. Developer of the Thorne load and the Thorne curve, precision gunnery techniques still taught today. 4th-ranking U.S. Navy ace with 19 confirmed victories. Next to the photo sits his notebook, the leather-bound one he started at 16, open to the first page. The quote visible, Precision is the difference between almost dead and almost alive. Choose precision. Visitors stop. Read. Some take pictures. A young Navy pilot stands in front of the display, fresh out of flight school, 23 years old, about to deploy to her first carrier. She reads the placard, she looks at the photo, she thinks about her own upcoming missions, the pressure to conform, to follow the manual, to not make waves. Then she reads the quote again, and she understands. Innovation requires courage. Being right when standing alone requires faith. And sometimes the difference between victory and defeat is measured not in volume, but in precision. She salutes the photo. Then she walks out into the Florida sunshine, ready to fly. Behind her, Garrett Thorne's six-fingered grin remains, silent, permanent, eternal. A reminder that one man who refuses to accept good enough can change the world. Not through volume, not through force, but through precision, through fire, through invisible bullets that burn hotter than the sun, and through the courage to trust the math when everyone else says you're wrong.